Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Who Are You and What Are You Doing Here? Today we have a writer, a poet, an artist, photographer, an advocate on the podcast today. We have t.r.h. Blue on the podcast, or Torri Blue. So she is somebody that I have been following for years now. I want to say close to 7 years, at least 5 years. She's just a gem of a human being. You will see quite immediately. She's just one of those people that kind of radiates and you want to be in her presence because she's we talk about this a lot. She's really after a life of calm, which is quite counter to I think what you find nowadays. So it was just a joy to be in her presence for a little bit over an hour, and I'm so excited that you'll get to virtually be in her presence as well. I hope that you find as much value in this conversation as I did, and I hope it encourages you to ask yourself what you need and see if you can give that to yourself, even if it's perhaps countercultural. Let's just dive right in. So
All right.
I have been following you for, I honestly don't remember how long. It's been years now. You're one of those people where like I can't exactly remember not following you.
Thank you.
I feel like you've just been in my social media orbit for a while.
That's great. I
Um,
appreciate that.
yeah, so good to talk to you. So excited to
Yeah.
introduce our listeners to you. So I really like to just start off by asking the questions that are in the name of the podcast. So if you had to answer these questions, who are you and what are you doing here? What kind of comes to mind?
Um, who am I? I am It's funny, I'm going to be so tangenty today. I'm in the middle of submitting some querying agents with a book proposal. And so I'm having to write sort of the answer to this question all the time. And I'm trying to get really good at just like summarizing it and making it very concise. Like, who am I? I am a queer, autistic, Jewish poet, writer, mother from Michigan. Um,
Oh my gosh,
yeah,
that's so beautiful.
yeah.
Well done.
Thank you. I'm getting there. Of course, I'm rambling all around it, but it's concise when I actually get down to the point. And then, what am I doing here? I mean, today I'm talking to you because you reached out to me. What am I doing here more generally? I am trying to figure out how to live a life that is defined by a sense of calm or peace. And obviously, there's plenty that can't be controlled about that at current events and politicians and um, general bigotry. And, there are so many things that are outside of what I have the capacity to control. Um, but moving towards peace where I can find it has,
Mm,
I think, become one of the defining qualities of the way I live my life.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's so inspiring. I want that too. It feels
Yeah.
so impossible sometimes
Yeah.
because of all the outside factors. But I am realizing more and more we do have some control, and that gives me hope
Hmm.
and, yeah, pushes me
Yeah.
towards trying to control is also like not my favorite word, but
Right.
yeah, control the pieces of my life that I can to help move towards calm. I
Hmm.
love that. Where does the desire for a calm life come from? Does it, I'm guessing, but does it come from historically not feeling calm or?
I think in some ways, I mean, as I've gotten older and I've become more in tune with myself and my body and the way I experience the world, I have realized how much I have spent so much of my life just trying to power through, like put my head down and power through.
Mm,
And I think a lot of that has just been, sort of social survival. Um, and it's easier for me to just bend a little than it is to deal with the repercussions of sort of holding tight to the things that I really want or need. I mean, I feel like we hear this from women all the time, this need to sort of perform a certain amount of compliance or conformity. And that has honestly never been something that I've been particularly good at. I remember growing up, it would just be like, people would think I was selfish because I wouldn't want to do something, or like everyone else agreed that they wanted to and I didn't. And so I'm the party pooper and I'm holding everyone back. And, so it hasn't so much been for me sort of that traditional sense of people pleasing as much as it has been like when I get to that point of saying no, people don't know that narrative that's going on inside my head for potentially days, weeks before, that's leading up to this, like this charge of energy where I just get to a point where I'm like, I can't take it anymore, I have to bow out.
Mm-hmm.
But that all happens in silence. And so yeah, it's been a lot for me of just like putting my head down, powering through, and then getting to that sort of point of like, I can't cope with this anymore.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think that has been just recognizing, like, starting to recognize what my body feels like when that charge is building up, and saying like, I can bow out sooner. I don't have to force myself through these situations that cause that kind of anxiety in me.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and then that, as I've done that, it's been like I find those little moments of like, I can breathe, I can rest, things feel lighter,
Mm-hmm.
and I just find myself craving more and more of that where I can find it.
Yeah. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. That makes so much sense.
Mm-hmm.
I It reminds me of what you wrote in your recent Instagram captions, which led me to originally reach out to you, which you essentially were setting boundaries around social media, I
Yeah.
think, to seek out that calm.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something I very much feel. When I was reading that, I was like, why is nobody else talking about this? It
Mm-hmm.
feels like so many people are still, and maybe it's just because they love it, but I guess I just don't see a lot of people talking like transparently about social media in the way that you have. And I guess, like, for the listeners, you were talking about how it's essentially too much
Mm-hmm.
to take in the varying content day to day, moment to moment on social media, given what is actually happening in the
Mm-hmm.
world and
Mm-hmm.
in life alongside all of that. And yeah, what has your relationship with social media looked like? What kind of led you to come to that point?
Mm-hmm. It's been a long time coming, to be honest. I quit Twitter years ago. Probably 2019 is when I quit Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then maybe a year after that, I deleted all my friends from Facebook, except for my immediate family.
Mm-hmm.
And Instagram was sort of the last thing that I had been holding on to. I don't have TikTok or any of that stuff. And Instagram I've held on to because, number one, it was just my favorite of those platforms. But um, number two, because it's where my business has been. And I wasn't sure what would happen to me, my writing, the things that I have really worked so hard to make space for in the past 8 years or so. Um, I have been unsure about what it would look like to leave that space. Um, but it's one of those, I mean, the science of it is like it does to your brain what gambling does to your brain. It's these
Mm-hmm.
like inconsistent hits of like reward. And I would find myself just caught in that sort of loop. And like, I know, like, if I would wake up and start the day looking at social media, I would literally spend the rest of the day looking at social media. And if I could just keep it out of my space, then I was usually fine. Um, and I don't know, maybe you've seen me talk about this, but I actually have a dumb phone.
Mm-hmm.
So
I have heard you talk about that.
yeah, so that happened before Instagram. It was Twitter, dumb phone, Facebook, Instagram. Um,
Mm.
but yeah, have just found that it creates that sort of charge for me. And I've known it for a while, but it was like, what do you do when like this is where you sort of have your livelihood, when this is where you share your art, or this is where you've like curated sort of a community to share that with.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess for me, it's just like at some point it starts to feel like the cost outweighs the benefit. And usually that comes from a moment of some like low grade despair where I'm just like, something has to change. Like, I spend a day really stuck on social media, and I realize that like I didn't give my son the attention I wanted to give him that day. And that creates this, this whole narrative in my mind about like, what am I doing? And I have these like small scale existential crises. And those are usually those moments that compel me to do something different. It's really hard to just like know it in theory, like, this is hard for me, this is harmful for me, and then make a change. It's like I have to sort of act when I have that sort of moment of willpower to do so.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, that's what happened with Instagram too. And I think it was back in maybe sometime around January that I was like, I'm leaving this year. I just have to go. But it's taken me this long to sort of figure out what that would look like. And I was really fortunate to have a friend who offered to post on my behalf. So I'm not trying to like live on social media, but when I have things that are worth sharing, I, have someone to do that. It feels like a nice compromise between me and my platform to still be able to utilize it for my art without having it be my focus or something that impacts me on a day-to-day.
Yep, totally.
Yeah.
I'm so happy for you.
Thank you.
I truly, you're inspiring me, and I think I need to. I find that I keep reaching these like, it's not quite a rock bottom, but it's like these mini rock bottoms. Like, I'm creeping closer, and it's so silly because I see myself headed there. Like, I know this is not good for me, and yet it feels so hard to set the boundaries. And I have similar questions where like I feel like I'm more on the front end of like trying to build something, or build some kind of business or community or whatever you want to call it. And I really am like, how do you do that? I know it's possible, but how do you do that? And so without social media. And so I think I use that as a reason to just kind of still stay in it, even though it's so not helpful. So
it gets to the point where it's like I have felt like I'm like a small animal in like a glass container that a lot of people are fighting over, and it's just like you're just getting so like jostled in this thing. And it's not like there are like soft places to land, really. It's like you have a moment of rest, and then the shaking starts again. And it was like just starting to feel like I am totally trapped here in this thing. And I just can't deal with it. I'm like, a part of it for me was a friend of mine posted this thing about like robot dogs. There were like these robot police dog type things, and they were all like moving in like synchronized motions. And she had some comment about like, oh my God, is this the end of the world? And I literally was like, it might be the end of the world. And then I just spiraled, and I was like, I cannot be here anymore. Like, it's like it's a 15-second clip of robot dogs, and I am unspooling. So like, clearly I'm not in a great place for all of this. But yeah, that was the real beginning of the end for me in the last couple of weeks, were those dogs.
Oh my gosh, that sounds a little bit horrifying.
And
when you really look at it, and this is not to like talk bad about anyone, because maybe I'll create a video like this someday, but I remember I was like, okay, this is a truly different landscape when like the reels and the TikTok type videos were becoming super popular. And those videos where people are like, it's just music in the background usually, and they're just like, there's text that pops up on different parts of the screen where people are just like
Yeah.
like point, and I'm
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
what am I doing right now? Why am
Hmm.
I watching this? Why? Like, I don't know. It just feels like it's not a good way to spend your time. And yet
Yeah.
here I am still consuming it.
It is. It is. I mean, it's definitely addictive. And like, if people have the energy for that, good on them. I mean, more
Yep.
power to you. I think the thing that really was painful for me about that transition was it's not at all what I do.
Mm-hmm.
And I am going on 33 years old. I hate being on camera. I like, you will rarely see me like talking to my Instagram stories or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. Like, I'll mostly just like type something up and like post it on like a black background. Cause I just, it's not, I'm very camera shy. I'm very anxious. I don't really get on with that sort of thing. And it got to the point where it was like, oh, only reels are showing up in my feed.
Yeah.
And I was just feeling so frustrated. And when I would share that I was frustrated, the majority of people would be like, well, here are some ideas for how you could start doing reels for what you do. And I'm like, I already feel like I give social media too much time, too much power, too much attention. And it's not what I do. Like, how many times is someone going to want to watch me handwrite one of my poems? Or like, I don't like reading out loud. Like, these are things that are really frustrating and challenging for me as an individual. And I am being forced to adapt or go. And I
Mm-hmm.
think partly too, it was just realizing like we are all like working for Instagram at this point,
Yep.
especially when we're doing things that are outside of our, I don't want to say comfort zone because it makes it sound like, oh, we just don't do things that we're not comfortable with, but like things that we're not comfortable with, I think
Yep.
are often worth not doing. And when it comes to a point where it's like you do things that are not you, that are not for you, just to stay in an algorithm because it's making the company money, but here are all the things that it's costing me in the meantime. And I'm not, see, it's, I mean, this is, Alex and I met in this very like culty um, religious community uh,
Mm.
back in 2014. But they had a thing called volunteer staff,
Mm-hmm.
which is essentially you're working 40 hours a week for them, but
Yeah.
you don't see a penny for it. And you always are having to perform if you want the opportunities that you hope will come in to come in. Um, it was a nightmare for me, but I feel like volunteer staff is like the perfect explanation of what we do
Yep.
for like big social media corporations. We're working for them for nothing. And I just, yeah, got to the point where I'm like, I'm just done. I'm done with
Yep.
the like, I don't know, the amount of time and energy. And um, it's like a little embarrassing to admit that there's a degree of like emotional turmoil involved in like sharing something I'm really excited about and not seeing any reciprocation because
Mm-hmm.
it's not in the algorithms, or do people not care? I don't know. And there's
Yep.
no way to know. And
Yeah.
like, I don't know, it just started to make me feel shitty all the time. And I was like, I'm not being paid enough for
Yeah.
this. So,
Truly.
you know,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
That's so good and so healthy. I think I stay on social media because it's so silly. Like I long for the good old days
Yeah.
when things were calmer and slower paced and more just still images and text, and I need to realize that's never coming back, even if
Mhm.
I completely like scrub through the people that I follow and only follow you and other people that have
Right.
like always been, you know, more of a calm corner of the internet that I've
Yeah.
appreciated. Instagram is still going to feed me reels or whatever.
Yep. I mean, I deleted everyone on my Facebook page, and today I just was going through, and now they're putting all of these suggested posts
Yeah. Yep.
in my news feed. And it's not even people that, I mean, some of them, it's like this woman that I had never heard of popped up like 10 times. And I'm like,
Yeah.
who is this? And why is she here? People seem very excited about her, but I don't know who she is.
Yeah,
And it was just like, it doesn't matter how much you filter through, like, what do I actually want to see? Because they're still going to give you more because that's how they get paid.
totally,
And
totally.
like, that sounds so cynical, but I think it's just the reality of it. And
Yeah,
I understand, like, you know, to each their own. Like, we have to make a living, and yeah, but like, I don't need to be party to that for
mm-hmm.
the founders of Meta.
Right. Totally.
I think
Oh
they're
my
doing
gosh.
okay without
Yeah,
me.
I think they'll be okay, and
Yeah.
what's more important is if you will be okay.
Yeah.
So taking care of yourself. Yeah, I give you so much credit. So
Thank
speaking
you.
of the good old days, I truly do long for those days when it was like, I don't know, I was just following such a sweet group of people, including yourself, and it really was like, this is when I still had hope that social media could be good. I was like, oh, if you curate your list, it can be like your followers or the people you're following, it can be such a
Yeah.
great thing. But can you talk a little bit about, I guess, how you started doing what you're doing, which I imagine involved social media, maybe wasn't exclusively on social
Hmm.
media, but I only know you as like a poet, an artist, a creative, an advocate that I have seen and like gotten to know one-sided online. But yeah, I'm curious, like, who were you before that? Did you do anything before what you do now, or did you go straight into it? And
Hmm.
what was it like building your business before
Yeah.
everything got crazy on Instagram and elsewhere?
I mean, full transparency, I am the furthest thing from an entrepreneur. I really, truly lucked into what I am doing now. I was at the time a part of my little cult, which I say tongue in cheek, but I mean it. Um, and I was working in social work. So I was working in Hollywood, at a place where uh, people would come during the day when they didn't have anywhere else to go. And I was burnt out literally all the time. It got to the point where I was like, I have to decide today if I want to make myself a meal or do my laundry because I don't have energy for both.
Mm.
I'm just that fatigued all the time. And I was going through a lot of stuff emotionally, being in this environment at this religious community where I was critiqued, criticized. Um, Literally, the criticism was nonstop, about everything, and then I would get overwhelmed and I would cry, and then they would criticize me for crying, and
Mm.
it was just one thing after another, and I had all of this. Um, it was like a swirling sort of emotional experience of like, I'm having all these feelings. I don't have anyone to share them with. When I do try, it's never reciprocated in the way that I feel like it needs to be. And I don't even always know what I'm trying to say because I'm trying to say it for the first time. Um, so I just feel stuck. Um, and so that's where I started turning to poetry. And I had written like here and there before, but it really became a way for me to understand what was going on internally for me, just to put it on the page, to communicate. I mean, in some ways, it felt like a revived teenage angst, but like it was just, how can I communicate with myself about what I'm experiencing? Um, so I started writing, and um, came up with this little handwritten font, and wrote something that I was really proud of, and decided, I'll share it. Like, it's like, I was using Instagram, like I think I used like Zanga in high school. Did you ever
I don't even
have
know
one of
know
those?
what is
Are you
that.
too young for that?
I don't
Uh,
know. I kind of lived under a rock.
it was a really specific moment in internet history when we all had blogs. It was like
Mm,
instead of Instagram, we all had blogs, and we
yeah.
would post our blogs, and you could follow each other's blogs, and you would get emails about each other's
Yep. Yep.
blogs. And you could write whatever angsty thing you wanted and just post it on the internet. But
Mhm.
like instead of being on a timeline, it would just be, for whoever wants to go and see what you're feeling today. You can put it in your away status on AIM.
Mhm.
It was like the early days
Incredible.
of like,
Yeah.
expressing your angst online.
Yeah.
But it was like that. And I just sort of was like sharing to share. I was sharing because I was proud of the stuff I was writing. Um, and then I think it was my sister actually who asked me, because she really loved the one that I posted. And she was like, have you ever considered like selling these prints or like, making more of these? Because I would hang that on my wall. I think it's really beautiful. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. So I started an Etsy site back
Mm.
then, just selling like the couple prints that I had. And I was handwriting them all one by one at that time. Um, so I guess they weren't prints. I guess they were handwritten poems. But I put them up for like $5. And I had a friend write me and say, I really want to buy this, but I'm not buying it for that cheap. You need to raise your prices. And so I raised my prices.
It's a good
And
friend.
yeah, I know it was really generous of her. And I just started doing that on like a very small scale. Um, and then I was also, as I was doing that little font, I would share quotes from people that, really quotes that really resonated with me. And I shared a couple quotes by Brene Brown, and she shared those. And suddenly I had like 16,000 followers overnight because
Wow.
she had, yeah, shared something that I had worked on. And she was really very, very generous with me and sharing my stuff early on. And I think the bulk of the people who follow me found me through her. So that's where I say I really lucked into it. Like it was this thing I was doing for, $15 for friends early on, posting for myself because I wasn't in therapy yet and I just needed to get things off my chest.
Mhm.
And Brene Brown shared it, and that was that.
That's
Uh,
so cool.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
funny. It's funny you say that because I do remember like in my mind you and Brene are friends. Like you're close.
we're
Like
like
you're
e-friends.
linked. Yeah, you're linked in
Yeah.
my brain. I think because yeah, I knew like she shared your stuff or vice versa, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe you've commented. I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
but now I'm remembering. Maybe that's creepy that I remember
Yeah, no, not at
not
all.
tracking your social media activity, but somehow you guys were, or maybe I remember, yeah, you sharing Brene's quotes, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if maybe I found you through Brene, or the other way
Yeah,
around, even.
interesting.
Um,
Yeah, I
Either
love
way, that's
her.
so
I love
cool.
her. Love her work.
Yeah,
And
she's
her
so
her work
cool.
was a big part of sort of liberating me from my the community that was so abusive towards me, towards just like
Mm-hmm.
helping me find value in my own self, my own experience. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I think her work very much inspired a lot of what I was writing back then as well. So
That's incredible. It's really cool to hear how you sort of, in some ways, fell into it, but also you put a lot of work into it as well. You weren't
yeah,
just like, yeah,
yeah.
credit where credit is due. You definitely like built something.
Well, thank you, thank you. It's funny because I'm like I am not. I cringe at having to self promote. It's
Mm-hmm.
not something I like at all. I think if I had not just lucked out having someone be very generous with their platform, I probably would be doing something very different right now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I'm grateful to have at least had that sort of moment of exposure because I do think my work speaks for itself. And I've gotten
Yep.
to write a lot of custom poems for people that have been really meaningful and have seemed to make people really happy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, or, happy is not always the context, but they've helped people process good, bad, hard things in their lives. Um, and that's been really unique experience, and I've really enjoyed being able to sort of connect with people in that way. So like all of that is to say, yes, I have definitely, worked hard, but my forte is not self-promotion. And I'm
Hmm.
really grateful that I've had that leg up.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
fair. That's so cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Your poetry is so good. I feel
Thank
like
you.
poetry is one of the like purest forms of truth. Like it speaks to you or speaks to me on a level that like
Hmm.
nothing else can.
Hmm.
And with poetry, I sometimes struggle because it's so deep that it's like it goes over my head. Like I don't quite understand it.
Hmm.
And I feel like your poetry is I really appreciate it because there honestly are pieces where I'm like, I don't know if I fully understand it, but also isn't that kind of part of poetry and art? It's
Hmm.
like that doesn't always have to be like clear cut or
Yeah.
something that is understood in the way that, a math equation might be
Right.
understood. But there are also pieces that do just speak like directly to me and it's
Hmm.
not I don't find it too hard to like grasp or find my own interpretation or own meaning
Yeah.
from it. So
Yeah.
I love it and I think it's incredible that you like I would have assumed you have been writing poetry like forever. Have you? And you just started recently
No,
sharing or you really
I've
only did it?
been I've been writing forever. I mean, it
Okay.
was the first real job that I wanted as a kid. The first job I wanted as a kid, I wanted to be a skunk. The second job I wanted as a kid was to be a writer. So,
Really? Oh
yeah.
my gosh.
Yeah, so I've always, I mean, language has come very naturally to me. Um,
Yeah.
and so, yeah, it's always been something that I love. I love writing, love reading. Um, but yeah, poetry has only been in the last maybe 10 years I've started writing
Okay.
poetry.
Cool.
And I mean, when I write these custom pieces for people, I try really hard to keep my work very accessible
Mhm.
because there's nothing worse than asking someone to write you something and then getting it and being like, I have no idea what this says.
Yeah.
So I think that that's part of why a lot of my work has resonated because as a poem, I try to keep it very, very concrete, very
Yeah.
like, exactly what's being said. At least the person who's receiving it knows exactly
Yeah.
what is being said. Um, but then the stuff I write for me can sometimes get a little more, I know exactly what I'm saying. I don't know if if anyone else will.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think accessibility in poetry is underappreciated
Yeah.
by you know,
Totally.
the general world.
Yeah. Well, it's so cool and I'm excited to see this like next leg of your journey where
Thank you.
you don't have to be on social media and
Hmm.
just like doing what Meta says we
Yeah.
should all be doing.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a little bit of time left. I would love to ask you about um, love. Reflections
Great.
on love. I think I was following you before this, but then like heard about you and Alex and loved your story, loved listening to the podcast that you did, sharing more about your relationship. And now I guess a few years out from that, so much has changed in the
Mhm.
world and in your life, I imagine, as a mother now.
Yeah.
Um, so maybe I can ask you about motherhood in
Hmm.
a moment. But yeah, I've just been thinking about relationships, love, connection lately, and
Hmm.
I'm wondering if you have any reflections on love. Like
Yeah.
what have you learned about love recently?
Great. I love it. Um, I mean, I think for me, and I mean, I can only speak to our relationship, but I think the thing that I have found in our relationship that has just been so beautiful and important to me is that same thing that we were talking about at the beginning of the episode, which is the feeling of calm and
Hmm.
peace. And it doesn't necessarily fit the like mold of the sort of love cliches that we hear a lot of the time with, the like the excitement and the butterflies and I feel like I'm being really hokey, but like the like rom-com feelings, we had those early on in our friendship. It was before we were even out.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we missed out on getting that honeymoon phase in a lot of ways, um, which is a loss. But as it is now, and as our relationship has grown and changed and established itself as something longstanding, I mean, we've been inseparable for the last going on 8 years. Actually, over 8 years now. That's wild.
Wow.
I don't need to go into that whole thing right here. Um, yeah, 8 years. Um, the thing that I've just loved about Alex and our relationship has been the sense of peace that we try to hold between us, but also that we try to be on our own. Um, we're both actively working at learning about ourselves and who we are so that we can bring a more whole person to the relationship, so that we can support each other as we can, when we can. It's hard, especially, I mean, we can get into the motherhood stuff, but um, when we are both struggling at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
it's always just a challenge because it's juggling motherhood and taking care of each other and taking care of our home and how do we do all this. But the thing that it just keeps coming back to is like, I mean, time together. We take so many walks. We spend a lot of time just like out and talking and taking the time that we can to actually listen to one another. And I think sort of the metaphor in those walks has become that like our relationship with one another feels like spending that time outside. It's like, okay, I can like, I can calm down. I can be completely where I'm at, who I am. I can have that feeling of, it's not always lightness because life's not always light, but that feeling of unburdening myself in this relationship because there's no pressure, no resentment. Like we work really hard at getting those little daily resentments out on the table as fast as we can. But yeah, the thing that I just keep coming back to is like, I love being with someone who makes me feel calm, who makes me feel at home in my body and in our life. So,
That's so
yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah,
Oh my
thanks.
gosh. That's the real rom-com. Like
Yeah,
I
super
went through
boring to watch, but great to be in.
No, I went through a whole phase of like grieving rom-com, like the fact that my life
Yeah.
would never be like that. And I think also especially growing up in a very religious environment where the messaging that I picked up at least was very much like find your other half, find your better
Yeah.
half. Um
My wife is so hot.
yeah, like truly
Yeah.
like find your person to be codependent with.
Yes.
I'm sure nobody said that to me directly, and I'm sure they didn't intend for me to pick up that messaging, but that's truly like what I kind of internalized by
Yeah,
accident, I
absolutely.
suppose. And yeah, Rob Bell talks a lot about this. Are you familiar with Rob Bell?
I am. Yeah, just I read one of his books like, 20 years ago.
Yeah,
And
he was super helpful for me at like the beginning of my
Mhm.
deconstruction. But he talks about how like relationships are two whole people coming together to like create something new.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I think that's like so well said. And it's weird coming to terms with the fact that, like real love, I think, is in some ways, or I guess on the surface, it doesn't look as good or as pretty or as exciting or
Mhm.
thrilling as a romantic comedy, but at the same time it
Mhm.
is so much better than that. And like that's what
Yeah.
I want
Yep.
everyone to know. And I guess I at least hope everybody knows that and feels that in
Mhm.
their own relationships, because yeah, now that I have a partner who is lovely and who also helps me feel calm, and I'm like, this
Mhm.
is just
It's
the
a
best.
when you find, it's like, for me, it's like when you find those things that are just like those pockets of wholeness and easy presence,
Mm-hmm.
and um I don't know, that feeling of just something coming off, something heavy coming off of your shoulders or whatever. um I mean, those are the things that I just keep moving towards, and of course
Mm-hmm.
that's no less true in my relationship.
Yeah.
um but yeah, and I think, I mean, that's what it comes down to for me every time. It's just like, where can I go to find that little, to find that space
Yeah.
of it feels almost indefinable to me, like just that space, the
Yeah.
fresh air feeling. um yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's so hard now,
Hmm.
not just with social media, but even just media and the news. It's always urgent. Like
Yeah.
there's this sense of urgency. And even like I struggle when I read the news or consume any sort of like news content. It feels wrong to not immediately enter a state of hypervigilance and
Hmm.
like panic.
Hmm.
So giving yourself that permission to find that space and sit in that space, knowing that you're going to be a better advocate or a better, you know, stronger person to kind of like cope with life and reality
Hmm.
when you do that
Hmm.
is so important and so
Yeah.
powerful.
And it really is a both and, I think, because the reality is like, yeah, my nervous system does still go into overdrive. It's not like, I, as much as I would love to be one of those people who are like, I've just found my like inner
You're
peace
zen.
and I'm
Yeah.
so calm all the time and it is what it is, and acceptance. That's not at all how I feel about the world.
Mm-hmm.
I feel about the world that it, in so many ways, is such a terrible, painful, devastating place to live. And it's beautiful and nurturing and extraordinary, and that all of these things are like coexisting. I don't know how to live in my own body, um, just prioritizing one over the other,
Mm-hmm.
either the trauma or the beauty and the calm. It's all very blended for me, um, to the point where I don't know how to separate them.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't know if I ever will. And like, it would be great to feel good all the time, but it just doesn't feel like that's where my humanity wants to sit. Um, my humanity wants to hold space for both, because both are
Yep.
true.
Yep.
And I think, reading the news cycles, I don't think anyone's nervous systems are equipped for the onslaught of information that we have at our fingertips every single day. Um, and the whiplash that comes with the good news and the bad news and the good news and the
Yeah.
bad news and everything in between. I mean, and I guess that's really all there is to be said about it. But
Yeah. I think that is, I mean, a big part of why I wanted to start this podcast because
mm-hmm.
I do struggle. I fully recognize it's both and it's a struggle
Yeah,
to have it be both. I think
yeah,
especially like not to keep talking about religion, but I do think I kind of grew up in a bit of a bubble where it was
mm-hmm.
easier to just try to focus on the good. There were all sorts of problems with like how I went about that, but um integrating the two and allowing like the full spectrum of reality
Yeah,
to exist at the same time.
mm-hmm.
There are many days where that feels like, I don't know. I was going to say too much to bear, but I'm like, I'm fine. I'm like in therapy and it's okay. But
Yeah, but still.
yeah, truly, I'm like, how are people managing right
Mm-hmm.
now?
Mm-hmm.
Because yeah, sometimes it just feels like too much. And I do think it's like finding that space,
Mm-hmm.
whatever that looks like for you,
Yeah.
is it's just so, so important. And I love that you've found it in your relationship, in nature,
Mm-hmm.
in your art, I imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else coming to mind for
I
like
mean,
ways? Yeah,
yeah, I think, I don't know if you get my newsletter or not,
I
but
do.
you do.
I just signed up. I didn't even know
Oh,
you were
great.
on Substack,
Yeah, I
which,
love
yeah,
Substack. Highly recommend.
cool.
But yeah, that has been a big part of my transition away from social media, but I digress. Um, I just wrote a piece about leafcutter bees, which I did not know exist until literally I saw one. I saw a bee carrying a leaf, this little
Hmm.
black and white bee. And I was like, what is that? And why is it carrying a leaf? So I Googled it. And then, of course, I went down this rabbit hole of like fascination and leafcutter bees. Um, but the metaphor I love. I think there's such a wisdom. Um, so they're solitary bees. They don't work in a hive. They literally just go from plant to plant, taking little pieces off of leaves and flower petals, and then turning them into these little thimble shaped um, pockets that they stuff with pollen. They lay an egg, and then they do another one, and it makes like the shape of a cigar.
Mm.
In these little tiny holes, rotting wood. Ours is happening in a crack in our staircase on our front porch. Um, and they make use of the most bizarre spaces. They take only what they need from the earth. And while they do these things, they are doing the work of 20 honeybees.
Wow.
One leafcutter bee does the pollinating work of 20 honeybees. And of course, honeybees are also deeply important. Um, but I think the thing that I realized in that moment was like, there's so much rhetoric around um, social media and engaging in activism and all of this that is so, it's so performance based. And I do think that there's a place for that, um, for spreading awareness, posting memes and like I I have been educated by people doing that work. So I am not saying that it's wrong. I am saying that like not everyone's a honeybee able to work in this sort of
Mm.
buzzing hive environment. Not everyone can make the most of that kind of engagement with the world. And just because you're doing something, you're tending to your own life, you're tending to your own, like, again, the leafcutter bees are just tending to their own children.
Yeah.
But while they're doing this work, they're helping flowers bloom, they're helping fruit grow, they're pollinating trees, they're like doing all of this good work quietly in their own way on their own time. And it's no less effective than those that are working in this sort of, hivey, I would consider, in my mind's metaphor, this very extroverted
Yeah.
sort of system. Um, so I guess I'm just saying all of that to say, like, I think that there is an underestimation of what we can do in our own space, in our own times, in our own lives without a platform. And I am challenging that idea in myself, because it feels important. Um, and because it feels true, and like to see it in nature, I'm like, okay, yeah, this is something that, is starting to really make sense to me.
Yeah. I
Mm-hmm.
love that so much. Yeah, I want to go get a little like leaf cutter bee tattoo on me or
Yes.
something. Like,
Yes.
that is such a good comparison. And it's so easy to be like, what's wrong with me for not being able to keep up with
Mm-hmm.
the reality that everybody else seems to be fine living in, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
social media, the news, just life.
Mm-hmm.
But recognizing we're all built differently, and that's
Yeah.
okay. Like,
Yep.
nature truly shows us that
Mm-hmm.
we need all of us to be
Mm-hmm.
who we actually are in order for it to all work.
it doesn't inherently diminish our impact in our community that we do things quietly and in our own way.
Yeah.
But that impact can still be just as great. And
Yeah.
it's just a different, it's just a quieter way of doing it. And
Yes.
quiet speaks to my speed, I think. So
Yes. I
yeah.
imagine it speaks to a lot of people's
Mm-hmm.
speed, but we have become so we've lost touch with the ability to get quiet and be
Mm-hmm.
still and enjoy calm. Like that feels panicky or
Yeah.
just like wrong.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And I think also, I mean, the world has never really, well, I can't say the world. America has never really been built for quiet people.
No.
Um, this is the like culture of put yourself out there, and why aren't you getting ahead on your own and pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and
Yeah. American
um,
dream.
salesmen, and yeah, and like, and again, there's a place for all of that, and like I do genuinely commend the people who have that sort of internal makeup where they can be educators and activists on this broad scale. um, I think that they're invaluable to the betterment of our community and our society.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not the only way to participate in that betterment. And I think that that's just what we lose touch with.
Yes, 100%. I could not agree more. Oh my gosh. Thank you for sharing all of this. I would love to ask you just a few more questions. I was going to call them
Sure.
lightning round questions, but it feels like wrong to call these, like to ask them and call them lightning round.
Yeah. I feel like we love the slow and the quiet. Now let's just.
Yeah, I know. Lightning round. Tell me about motherhood. That's
Yeah.
just like not a lightning round question. But if you had to summarize or, pick one thing or two things to talk about, I would love to just hear your reflections on motherhood, because that's another thing where I feel like we're fed certain messages about parenthood or
Mm-hmm.
having children, and reality can often be so much similar to rom-coms, like
Mm-hmm.
so much more beautiful and deeper in ways
Yeah.
that we're not usually told. So I am not a mother, so I'm purely guessing, but what has been maybe like one of the most surprising things that you've learned from motherhood or from your son?
Yeah. It's interesting. It has oddly been very intuitive for me, but I feel like a big part of that has just been I have not been in the sort of American mom culture at all. So I don't know if I'm doing anything right per like the books, but my son is just, we are very much, I think, on the same frequency most of the time. I mean, he's his own person. He has his days. Um, but I have been surprised at, for me, how simple it's felt. And I know that I feel like generally when people are, trying to get honest about motherhood, it's about the stuff that's really hard. And that's not to say that there's not plenty that's difficult. And especially like, I mean, these days with the news cycles and, reports of violence against children or parents dying or whatever, it is very, very hard to cope with all of that information right now because of course, you put yourself in the shoes of these parents, or you wonder about these kids who have been left behind, or you hear about mothers being separated from their children at the borders. I mean, it's unfathomable to
Mm-hmm.
me. And of course that is part of the problem. I don't know. I will go on and on. I'm saying all this to say, I think the potential, like the preemptive heartache or the anticipatory grief has been very, very, very overwhelming for me at times. But as far as our like day-to-day living goes, I've just been surprised that it has come to me intuitively. And I've been surprised that it has been, I hate to say easy, but relatively easy relationally. Um, and again, it's like, it's the other side of that coin of like, I don't want to be rom-commy about it, but for me, like, it really just has been like the delight of my life. Yeah. And, you know, I want to qualify it with all these, like, I'm aware that it's not like this for everyone, but like, you know, no shit. I just,
It's allowed to be what it has been,
yeah.
which is beautiful, it sounds like.
Yeah. It's just been really good. And it's also like sometimes so boring.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I am tired of him drawing on our marble uh, coffee table with washable markers, but it comes off. It's not that big of a deal. And I just have to decide, like, is it worth it to me today? But like, those are the struggles I've had for my day-to-day parenting. It has been really, I've been very fortunate, I think, in that way. But also like, my kid is weird. He's like a he's like a weird little guy. Um, in a way that I absolutely love and really admire. And um, you know, I guess one of the things I think has been surprising to me or informative is just recognizing things that I didn't know that I had needed as a kid that I didn't have. Again, like with this idea of like, we have to power through, and that is just so much a part of my way of operating that I don't even always realize that I'm doing it. Um, and my son is very sensitive to crowds, strangers, sort of exuberant environments. We took him to a Tot Shabbat at our temple down in Nashville when we were visiting, and he was just not having it. And in my mind, I'm like, he'll adapt, right? Like, we have to just sort of power through this. It's not like I made that decision
Yeah.
cognitively. It was like, that was just naturally where my mind went without even thinking about it. And he kept pointing outside and saying trees, trees, trees. And Alex was like, I'm going to take him outside. He doesn't want to be in here. He's going to go outside. And it dawned on me when she said that, like, oh my God, that's an option.
Mm.
Like, we really can just give him what he needs in this moment.
Yeah.
It's Shabbat. It's meant to be a day for you, for your rest, for your well-being, and we're like forcing you to sit through this thing that you are just not into. And it doesn't matter that all the other kids are. We can take you outside and you can go touch the trees, which is all he wanted to do. And just realizing that, like, I becoming aware of other options. It's been a challenge for me. I'm aware that like I need to do that work for myself so that I don't just by default put him through things that I went through that weren't helpful for me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, it is very illuminating to like, first of all, try to attune myself to another person's needs. And second of all, to realize that I can't be attuned to his needs in that way if I'm not attuned to my own.
Mm-hmm.
Um, which seems so obvious, but you know, when it's happening in your own body, it's a totally different experience.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. It's so incredible how kids are able to like advocate for their own needs and don't have all the conditioning of the world yet that
Mm-hmm.
tells them like, wait, you're not allowed to
Mm-hmm.
need whatever you need or
Yeah.
be where you are. Yeah, it's like it's just such a good lesson and reminder. I love what you were
Mm-hmm.
saying about like recognizing that there are more options than
Mm-hmm.
maybe the default one that you
Yep.
fall into or assume.
And it makes me wonder
Um,
how many like alternative, it's like similar to leaving social media, like how many alternative ways of living better am I missing out on just because I don't think about it, or I
yeah,
don't I don't know to look for it. It's like, I don't know if you've ever had this experience. It's one of my favorite things, but when you like learn a new word and it feels like for me, it feels like a door in my brain opens and all of a sudden there are all these new rooms to explore because I'm like, I have language for this thing
Yeah.
that I didn't know was a thing. And now I get to go explore all of these new ideas based on like what this one word opened up. And I just wonder like how many of those doors are still shut because I don't there's something I don't know. There's like some key missing.
Yeah.
And it's just paying attention, listening, being observant. Um, Sometimes that's enough to sort of crack them open and introduce you to a whole new way of being, existing in the world. Mm-hmm.
A whole new world.
Mm-hmm.
That's so cool. Oh, like so much wisdom in everything you've said
Oh, thank
in
you.
this call, I think. Can I ask you about your grandmother?
Yeah.
It's hard to like just think of one question, but can you just tell us a little bit about her? Because I've
Mm-hmm.
heard you talk about her here
Mm-hmm.
and there, and yeah, whether you want to share maybe like one lesson that she taught you
Mm-hmm.
or a little bit about who she was.
Yeah.
Just want to hear about her.
I mean, she was I've described her in the past as my one true soul sister.
Mm.
She was the person for me when I was my son's age who just got me. Like she just intuitively knew who I was. And like when I was having my outbursts, um, a lot of the adults around me, my parents included at their own admission, thought that it was stubbornness and hard headedness. And my grandma looked at me and said, no, she's very, very sensitive. Um, and she treated me like I was sensitive and she like cared for me like I was sensitive. And she just became that person for me that I just felt so, it was like almost like she never had to earn my trust. She just had it from the outset because she got me and
Mm-hmm.
cared for me as myself. Not as an idea of me, not as who she thought I should or could be, but just me.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, yeah, and she was an eccentric lady too. I mean, my family is a lot of very weird people, and I say that in, you know, the most loving and affirming way. Uh, but she was just like an oddball. I found these, I wish I had them with me, these letters that she wrote me. My mom and dad are in the process of moving and they've got all of these boxes that they had from her house in their basement. And I was going through and she had printed off emails that we had. And she told me this
Oh.
story about trying to, who she, oh, this woman who was from maybe Bulgaria or something, who was
Mm-hmm.
one of her caretakers when she was at her home. And she would come in every day, and this woman was an atheist, and my grandma was a Christian. And grandma felt this need to evangelize, but she was just waiting for her time because she didn't want to like push her limits. And this they started talking about politics and all these things, and this woman said, who do you think made the world? And grandma went on and on about how God did. Of course God did. And the woman looked so confused, and grandma realized after the fact that she had asked, who do you think made the war?
Oh
And,
my
and
gosh.
she just like got to the, but she had these like moments of realization and then just thought it was funny. It was never
Yeah.
like there was no shame, there was no self-consciousness. It was just like, oh dear, I really messed up. Like so many stories like that of just
Oh.
mishearing, saying the wrong thing at the wrong time.
Mm-hmm.
But in this, she just had this sense of sort of unabashed self acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. she just was who she was,
Yeah.
and that was it. And that was the thing that I think everyone loved about her. Um, yeah, and I'm like watching my son grow, and I'm like, she would have loved him. She would have gotten him too, because he's a lot like I was at that age, and I just wish she was around to know him. I think that's just like one of those griefs of, you know, someone not being there to know someone you love not being there to know someone else you love
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
it's just a hard pill.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It totally is. It's so beautiful to hear you. I feel like I've said beautiful like 50 times in this interview, but
Thank you. I'll take it.
um but it's so true. I love hearing you talk about her, and I think we need more of that. People who are just so
Mm-hmm.
deeply like so fully embrace their own humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And I was listening to something recently about actually like philosophy or religion, and I don't know, I'm going to completely like mess this up, but it was talking about how religion or faith maybe works when you can hold like both the seriousness of it alongside like allowing it to not matter at all. It's like
Mm-hmm.
it's it matters and also nothing matters.
Yeah.
So being able to keep that like lightheartedness
Mm-hmm.
about you, I think is something that I know I could do better,
Yeah.
do more of.
I
So
aspire to it for sure. it's it's something Alex does so well that I always am like, how do you do that? Like, she's just goofy. And I have always been a little too serious, I think, for my own good.
mhm.
Um, and she just, like, she'll do these things, and I don't know whether to stare or laugh or leave. It's like this is just so bizarre, but she just somehow finds it in her to be like funny and weird and like, again, goofy. And I watch Auden, and he just loves it. He just thinks it's the most fun. I'm like, Alex is the fun mom, and I'm the like, the crabby mom. Um, but it's like I don't know how to get there, but I wish that I did, or like I want to figure out like maybe what are the things for me that like allow me to be that uninhibited,
Yeah.
that just like unself-consciously delighted with
Yes. Oh.
life. Yeah, it's not a strength for me, but I do aspire to it.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
so cool. I feel like I could say similar things about my partner where
Mm-hmm.
I said this I like interviewed him for the podcast, and I told him like he's incredibly weird
Mm-hmm.
in the best way. And I am too, and I think we like bring that out in each other. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, play is a lost art. I think
Yeah.
it's so important. And children can also often bring that out in us, which I really
Mm-hmm.
appreciate too.
Yeah.
I was going to say something earlier. Oh, just that I see like how you describe your grandmother and how she treated you. I heard that earlier in the interview. I feel like you treat your son in a very similar way, and it's just cool to see how, I don't know the right way to say it, like her legacy is living on. Not to say that that quality isn't your own, but
No, but it makes a difference when you see it modeled. It really does.
totally.
Again, it's like one of those doors that's been open for a long time, because I've known her and heard stories about her and heard stories she told about me when I was my son's age. And,
Mm,
I it's a world I've been able to see sort of through her eyes for such a long time, looking at me. And it makes it so much simpler, I guess,
yeah.
so much more natural to be able to look at my son and see the same. And I don't know, I mean, it's impossible to know whether or not it would have been the same if she had not been my grandmother, like maybe it would have been totally intuitive to me and maybe not, but I definitely feel the influence of, her love and insight all the time.
Yeah, that's so special. Oh my goodness. I could ask you so many more questions, but I feel like we did cover a lot of ground in not too long a time. So thank you so much for sticking around a little bit longer.
Of course.
Just to wrap up, how can people find you? How can people support you?
I mean, you can follow me on Instagram. I will post there every so often via my friend Gloria. But the best ways right now to keep up with what I do would be Substack. That's notesontheway.substack.com. Or you can also find that and order my custom poems, order prints of my work, order my chapbook, all through my website, which is just notesontheway.com.
Okay, perfect. I will link all of that stuff in the description. Thank you so much again. I deeply appreciate, this sounds so cheesy, but who you are and what you're doing here. And I'm truly so excited to see this like next portion of your journey. I give you so much credit for taking good care of yourself and setting boundaries where boundaries need to be set. And I appreciate you taking the time today. It's been so nice getting to know you a little bit better.
Yeah.
Oh, a delight. I love that word.
Me too. It's a good one.
All right. Thank you so much for listening to Who Are You and What Are You Doing Here, episode number 4. It's been great hanging with you. And as always, if you have any feedback, you can always reach out to me at bibs.live/contact if you'd like to leave a review, if you have anything positive to say. Would love it if you left a review. We welcome reviews on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also comment on YouTube if you watched the video version. And I hope that you will subscribe if you haven't already, because we have some really cool interviews coming out in the next month or so. Just some really solid people, really solid conversations. Really made me feel hope, which is sometimes a rare sighting these days with the world seemingly crumbling around us. So anywho, hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next one. Glad you're here. Talk soon.